From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And ahead today during his weekly segment on the grain market trends, K-State's Dan O'Brien will talk about the possible expansion of grain sorghum acreage in light of corn and soybean planting delays. And Dan will look ahead to next week's USDA grain supply and demand reports. He'll be followed by K-State's Romulo Lollato. Romulo offering his latest observations on the condition of the Kansas wheat crop. He'll talk about the late ripening of the crop, the white wheat syndrome resulting from oversaturated fields, and the really good-looking wheat found in large parts of western Kansas. And further ahead with an update on the Kansas agricultural weather outlook, K-State's Mary Knapp. All this and more here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome once more to another Agriculture Today. It's been another wild roller coaster ride in the grain trades this week. We'll talk about that. We'll take a look ahead to the USDA's much-anticipated June 11th crop and grain stocks reports. And we'll talk about grain sorghum and the potential for hike in acreage there and how that market might fare in the wake of that. Dan O'Brien with us, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, via phone from Colby, northwest Kansas. So, Dan, this past trading week, amidst all of the volatility and the gyrations over corn planting delays, weather effects of all manner, what stood out to you?
Well, we would be up 15, 20 cents one day and then fall off, that with the world ending the next, and then come back and things not look too bad at the end of it all. So just a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty. I keep thinking about the large negative bearish positions that were in these grain markets before all of this occurred, and before basically planting problems came to the front that couldn't be ignored about mid-May on. For the last several weeks, a good number of those positions have had to be unwound, but not all of them. So it just seems like a process of groping to figure out just where things will go. It doesn't take much to look at these planted numbers, well, for corn in particular, and to think, gosh, there's potential for a lot of acres not to be planted. As in 10, 20 million acres, and the numbers that come out from analysts are cautious, and they state that they're being cautious, that they don't want to roil up the market. But a lot of folks are saying 7, 8 million acres not planted. But if you look at the actual percent planted, if the percent planted matches up with reality out in the field, then it's at least a barometer of it. There's still the hope that corn producers will keep going even at this late date, where they can get into fields and keep planting. In fact, I think when you look at the slowness of soybean planting in a number of areas and really grain sorghum planting here in Kansas, just in itself, you could say, gosh, you've got delays. To some degree, I think that folks are finishing up corn planting where they can, even at this late date. So the real story for those other crops, again, soybeans, grain sorghum, for us, and the central and southern plains, that'll be told in the next several weeks. Again, the final planting date for grain sorghum is the 25th of June, I believe. I personally am wondering about how in the eastern Corn Belt and some of those areas where you have ethanol plants that are going to be really short on supplies, do they look to grain sorghum? Or what do they do? What type of plan do places like that have in place, or what are they going to try to develop to meet their shortfall and not really be caught short on supplies? And if they're getting caught short on supplies, there'll be upward price pressure on the demand side. Corn closed yesterday, D's corn at $438.5. We were looking at corn at around $4 to $3.90, $3.86. I think it got down to, and now we're up about 30-40 cents from that. And at least in my own thinking, there's the potential for scenarios that even take that much higher. But it's probably wise not to go there yet until we actually know if we're going to end up this short on acreage in production.
So you have these markets that are looking for some stability of some fashion. Will they likely put more stock in the USDA's production and stocks reports that are coming out on Tuesday?
Probably not. And the reason for saying that is that how will the USDA make any adjustments? There's a tendency for them to not want to bring about extreme outcomes in the market until they're really sure. You know, when I say bring about, and literally when the USDA now announces numbers in this algorithm-driven age that we have, the market in quick order responds to that, plus or negative. And when you look at the numbers that are going to be coming out, it's really telling to see what analysts that have given estimates are indicating they think the numbers will be versus what do they think the final numbers will be. For ending stocks projections, for corn, for the new crop marketing year's projection, 2019-20, the pre-trade estimate about 1.917 billion bushels. When you dig down deeper in the numbers and ask what they really think the final numbers will be, it's closer to 1.6 billion. So, you know, that's the difference between being close to 2 billion versus being close to 1.5. And for wheat, a bit of a thought that wheat stocks, ending stocks for the new crop marketing year, which we're in right now for wheat, again, began June 1st, basically 1.118 billion bushels. Thoughts that we probably would be a little bit lower than that based on what we finally end up for with crops in our area and also in the soft red winter wheat area. On the soybean side, it's kind of the opposite. Average trade guess of about 983 million bushels for what they think the USDA will say, just a bit higher than that for what they think we may end up with. And again, soybeans are caught up in this corn deal, quote, in that, you know, if we're not able to plant corn acres, but yet it looks like things are drying out, then it's the beans or grain, sorghum, or something else that they plant. So until the corn question gets answered and we figure out what our acreage is for beans, we have a large bit of uncertainty in that crop. On the world side, you look at world ending stocks for wheat projected at 290 million bushels in terms of what the USDA will say. Private analysts, in their own thought, think about 4 million metric tons less than that, about 286. For corn, projection of about 305. Private estimates of what they actually think will happen, more like 298. And I've got that same question on the corn side. I don't know that these world corn numbers have taken into account what happens if we don't get at least to say a 14 billion bushel U.S. corn crop. If you start plugging in a 13 or a 13 and a half or a 12 and a half, I don't know that the world supply-demand numbers are accounting for that. And I don't know that the ending stocks figures are representing that yet. So you have the potential to have a large reset event happening, not just the U.S., but in the world corn market. Would also say, in terms of production, USDA is anticipated to say they'll have about a 14.25 billion bushel corn crop, but the analysts think it's closer to 13.6, and that 13.6 is as good a guess as any. But who would be surprised that if that's the average, on the low side, there's a trade estimate of 12.6 coming in. On the high side, 14.8. Tell you what you don't see now is 15. For the size of a crop, you're wondering how much lower this will be. Again, that figure will drive usage and rationing of usage and where the ending stocks end up at. So you put these, what we just talked about, together, you've got analysts really thinking that we have something like a 13.65 billion bushel corn crop and ending stocks down to 1.6, but they're thinking the USDA is going to come out and say 14.25 billion bushels and about 1.9. So that's the setup in the corn market coming into this USDA report, and anticipation that it won't go all the way there in terms of where the final size of the U.S. corn crop would actually go.
Well, Dan, there's a sense out there, and it may be more than that, more than just a hunch, that we will see a boom in grain sorghum acreage because of the multitude of factors that we've been talking about. And you put together some information. It'll be on agmanager.info, looking at the price scenarios for grain sorghum. This will be an interesting scenario to watch.
Yeah, I think with the late plantings of corn in parts not just of Kansas, but the rest of the Corn Belt, you do hear news reports from as far away as Michigan and other areas that there are considerations of putting grain sorghum in. And a whole number of questions come up again. Can they get the crop insured? Can they get the seed? Do they know how to handle the crop? And when you look at the history of states around the U.S., a lot of them have in the past grown grain sorghum. And the big issue there, of course, is that you've got delayed crop insurance verification dates, and if someone's looking at a dramatically reduced insurance coverage for corn off in some place to the east and north of us, grain sorghum might be able to fit the bill. They'll have to use their best judgment, their university agronomist's best judgment of what kind of yields they can attain, et cetera. I think that when you look at Kansas in particular, our planting rate for grain sorghum is slower than normal. We're sitting at about 8% done. Normally, we're about 26%. But I don't put a lot of stock in that yet. I don't think that we're going to go in earnest towards grain sorghum until we get all the earlier planted crops all done. So once corn gets done or people make their final decision, then we'll see where grain sorghum goes, and we have a good chunk, most of the rest of the month, to determine where that will go. I think if you do see some of these switches, and you look at, say, 250,000, 500,000, 750,000 acres, and start looking at the scenarios, at least my own thoughts are that we could end up with more sorghum production, but I don't know that we'll get below, say, 20 million bushels for ending stocks, and unless foreign buyers come in really strong, the extra production, I think, will go towards ethanol plants and livestock feeding, because it would be consistent with the idea that we're probably going to be pretty tight for U.S. corn production, and gosh, anything that grain sorghum can contribute often is in parts of the Corn Belt, it'll be, quote, gobbled up.
Well, Dan's notes for the week cover all of this, and you can find them at agmanager.info. Once more, Dan, many thanks, and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, Dan O'Brien there, and you're tuned to Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today is back now, and with an update on the state of the winter wheat crop in Kansas from an individual who has had a front row seat to that, as he has been on the wheat plot tour circuit marathon the last few weeks. Romulo Lollato joins us via phone now, as he's on the road in north central Kansas. Romulo, as you know, wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Romulo, first of all, you're in Clay County, Kansas, as we speak, and a number of counties and extension districts around the state established their own wheat variety test plots, if you will, and that's why you're there to talk about the results of those plots with producers, right?
Hi, Eric. Yes, those plots, they're mostly demonstration plots, and that really gives us a chance to see how those varieties are standing this year, right, how they are reacting to the different diseases that we have out there, how they are standing, if we have any lodging issues. And so it really gives us a very good chance to evaluate kind of the performance of that variety, not necessarily only on yield, but really a lot of the disease reactions and agronomic performance of the variety there. And more importantly, it gives us the chance to talk to producers. So during this time, we have generally, up to 50, 60, or even 70 plot tours around the state. Mm-hmm. And so that really gives us the chance to be there interacting with producers and answering any questions and just learning from them as well.
What is the main thing, if there is one thing, on producers' minds right now regarding their wheat stands?
Well, it really depends where we are in the state. So for a producer in south central Kansas and even into central Kansas, definitely the big elephant in the room there is the white wheat that they're seeing. Just this last few weeks, we had just an excessive amount of rainfall in that region, and the wheat has started to turn white. And statewide, I think that's probably the biggest concern that we have in Kansas right now. It is a very large region in between that Sumner County area, as far north as about Saline or so, and then as far west as about Great Bend, just that central section, the south central section of the state. There's just many fields that are just turning white. Just this morning I got some photos from Dickinson County where 80% of a couple of fields were just turned white. So the wheat crop is dying prematurely. It's dying still in that milk stage of grain development, sometimes even earlier than that. That crop that is dying prematurely, there's not going to be a lot of yield there, because if the crop was further along, a little bit more advanced, like in the late stages of dough development, we would see some shriveled grains, but still there will be something to harvest out of there. Now, as late as the crop has been this year, these waterlogging conditions will really drown out the crop. That root system underneath the soil, it doesn't last long if we have saturated water conditions. So 24, 48 hours, and we really start seeing it decay. And so definitely for those producers in central and south central part of the state, that's their biggest concern right now. And it is a huge concern statewide. I wouldn't be surprised if 15 or 20% of the area in the state ends up being affected.
Wanted to ask you about the maturity progress of wheat in the state. We have had a few dry and relatively warm days the last week or so. Is this crop catching up at all in those areas where there has been at least modestly favorable weather of late?
It really depends, Eric. It is starting to. So as you mentioned, these warm conditions really will speed up the crop if it continues to be this warm. But still going out and about and talking to producers, the general feeling is at least a week behind, in some cases up to 10 days or even up to 15 days behind. I guess in the north central part of the state, remember that last October when the wheat crop was getting planted, we had a lot of rain, and so those fields that were still waiting on the soybean crop to be harvested, they got planted into mid-November, sometimes even late November. And that crop, it's still at least 2 weeks behind. Some producers were considering it even being close to 3 weeks behind. So for that crop, it might be a concern with this if the temperature really continue to be as hot as it has been these last few days, because then it's going to put the entire grain field period of that crop under heat stress. So we're still behind overall in the state. Of course, depends where we are, anywhere from maybe 5 to 7 days all the way to 2.5 weeks behind in development there.
Your thoughts on disease problems you're seeing out there? Have the rust diseases started to really show themselves?
Yeah, so we're seeing quite a bit of leaf rust. We're also seeing quite a bit of stripe rust in fields that did not get sprayed. It seemed like this year, for some reason, they developed a little bit slower than what we have seen in the past. We were expecting more of a faster development of both of those diseases, but it is definitely there. So now, these last 2 weeks, we've seen quite a bit of stripe and leaf rust. And perhaps one thing that producers need to have in mind is that what we're seeing that looks like race change in some of these diseases, because some of the varieties that historically were considered resistant to either leaf or stripe rust, we're starting to see some development of the diseases on these varieties. And so just be aware of that. I mean, whenever you're selecting a variety for the next season, some of these varieties that have been just very resistant in the past, they're going to fall into that intermediate category that, depending on the conditions, might warrant a further fungicide application there. So that's one of the things that we're seeing around the state. Definitely leaf and stripe rust in fields that did not get sprayed. Another big concern that we have this year is also head scab. If we remember back 2-3 weeks when the wheat was just heading out and going through that flowering process, we had a lot of rainfall, right? And so all that rainfall really favors the development of that disease called fusarium head blight or head scab that's going to affect the wheat kernels and the wheat head. And so some of those kernels or some of those spikelets are going to turn white, and a chalky kernel is going to develop inside there without much test weight to eat or kernel weight to eat either. So we're seeing field after field, some level of scab developing. So that's going to be definitely a concern in the south central part of the state, where I started to see these a couple of weeks back, because they're going to have that waterlogged field, and whatever we're able to harvest from there in many of those fields, they might still have some issues with grain quality because of the vomatoxin that can accumulate on those grains due to that head scab disease. And in the north central part of the state, we are not seeing as much waterlogging, but definitely we are seeing head scab pretty consistently. Again, the conditions were just perfect for that head scab development a few weeks back when the wheat was flowering. Now, it depends on variety. So some varieties that are quite susceptible, such as a K-State variety called Canmark, or a Westbred variety called WB4458. So those varieties, I've seen fields that had up to 15-20% of incidence of that disease, and so meaning that maybe 20% of the heads were showing some level of that disease showing up, and that can be a pretty big concern. In some of the more tolerant varieties, like Zenda or WB4269 or some of the other more tolerant varieties, the levels are much lower than that, maybe 1-2% of the heads showing up, sometimes not many heads at all. But that's a concern. Right. That's a concern because it also affects buying decisions from traders looking into buying wheat from Kansas, just because of those vomatoxin levels that can be carried out in the grain.
Well, clearly there are flaws in the Kansas wheat crop, but, Romulo, we also must acknowledge that there's an ample amount of really good wheat out there as well.
Eric, there are parts of the state that are looking excellent. The late planted fields in north central Kansas, throughout the season they were struggling quite a bit, and now many of them look like they have a very good potential. They were struggling because they got planted very late, and we have a cold fall and a cold winter and a cold spring there. So they never really developed much, and now many of those fields, they're looking like they have a 40, 50, even 60 bushel per acre potential. Of course, it's going to depend on the temperatures. And the western part of the state as well. Lane County, Scott County, Wichita County, that we've been on plot tours already. The wheat there is tremendous. For the most part, it's looking with an excellent yield potential, and I think the western part of the state is up for an excellent crop.
Well, we would note that, in fact, you will be in northwest Kansas. There will be 9 K-State Research and Extension local wheat plot tours in the northwest part of the state next week. So this is an excellent opportunity for producers to come out and see how well these varieties are performing, in some cases under duress. So it's a great chance for producers to learn about those variety differences.
Definitely. I would recommend the producers take advantage of that. They have the chance to ask questions directly to us, who will be there talking to them on those plot tours. So the area agronomist Lucas Hag is going to be there, with Eric DeWolf is also going to be there, and the county agents will be on their respective plot tours as well. All that information as far as the exact time and exact location of each one of those plot tours, they are available on social media, so either Twitter or Facebook. If you go to @KSU-Wheat, again, that's @KSU-Wheat, all the information should be posted there. So, plan to attend a plot tour nearby.
And not only on the social media, but you can inquire at your local extension office likewise on the dates and locations. So good luck with the next round of these, and we'll talk with you again soon, Romulo. Many thanks for taking the time to visit with us right here.
Thank you, Eric.
He is Romulo Lollato, wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network, and we'll return with more on this Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and continuing on now with today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, farmers in at least 6 states should be eligible for more financial aid under that $19 billion disaster aid bill signed into law yesterday by President Trump, with $3 billion specifically set aside for agricultural losses. The legislation will help offset losses for producers who had grain stored on farms this spring that were destroyed in the Midwest flooding. The bill, however, also causes some confusion over language regarding crops prevented from planting in 2019 and just what all that would mean. Now, Nebraska, Iowa, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and California were the states immediately identified as recipients of the aid. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue released a statement commending the president for signing the bill and thanking members of Congress for it, but the USDA did not provide any details on how the department would begin providing the new round of disaster aid. That specific language on crops prevented from planting was not in the original disaster bill. It was added this spring as congressional appropriators worked on crafting the language, and senators amended the bill several times. The bill also specifies raises in coverage levels for crop insurance protections from the past disaster bill to 90% for those who bought insurance policies and 70% for those who had non-insured crops. For comparison purposes, under the disaster program created for the 2017 weather challenges, farmers were only covered if they were in counties that had a presidential emergency declaration or a secretarial designation. Payments were based then on a formula that subtracted insurance indemnities and market revenue from crops. The value of U.S. agricultural exports in April fell to $11.2 billion, the lowest of fiscal year 19 and the smallest since September, when they were just $10.3 billion. Imports of agricultural products into the U.S. rose to $12.1 billion. That's a new monthly record and the first time that the value of imports cleared $12 billion. This resulted in a trade deficit of $865 million, which would be the first monthly trade deficit for agriculture since May of 2017, when it was $46 million. The April figure would also be the biggest monthly trade red ink on record. The April data puts fiscal 19 ag exports at $81.2 billion against imports of $77.3 billion. That would be a surplus then of just $3.9 billion. The USDA back in May lowered its expectation for fiscal 19 ag exports to $137 billion against imports forecast at a record $129 billion for a trade surplus of only $8 billion. And the Trump administration would exempt many new genetically engineered crops from regulation by the USDA. Under a broad overhaul of biotechnology rules announced this week, the USDA said the move would cut the cost of developing genetically engineered plants and would exempt crops with traits similar in kind to modifications that could be produced through traditional breeding techniques. Developers would be allowed to make a self-determination that their products are exempt from regulation. The administration argued the approach would allow regulators to focus on increasingly complex products, which in turn may pose new types of risks. The USDA estimated this proposal would save developers an average of $3.6 million for each new genetically engineered crop if the product is not also regulated by the Food and Drug Administration or the EPA. If another government agency also regulated that plant, the average savings, they say, would drop to $730,000. Well, stripe rust disease has been a formidable foe for Central Plains wheat growers for several years running now. USDA researchers are collaborating with wheat scientists here at Kansas State University to take the stripe rust challenge head on. Marcia Boswell has more on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
As most farmers and many non-farmers know, stripe rust is nobody's friend. Seeing this dangerous disease on your crop can be devastating to a farmer's yield. The good news is there are researchers trying to resolve this issue for you. In Manhattan, Kansas, research specialists at USDA are striving to create a wheat variety that's resistant to stripe rust. Building 7 at the USDA Grain Marketing and Production Research Center previously housed a facility designed for wind erosion research. When the building was destroyed in 2008 by a tornado, things changed. With funding being scarce, the wind erosion research team had to relocate. But with their research budget enhanced, the Hard Winter Wheat Genetics Research Unit was fortunate enough to move their research into Building 7. The renovated Building 7 is around 10,000 square feet and has the best modern technology that's available. They can grow wheat year-round in their large growth room equipped with LED lights. Mary Gutierrez, USDA research geneticist, says being able to grow wheat 365 days a year is a huge benefit to wheat research. The renovated building provides space to benefit all aspects of receiving, growing, processing, characterizing, treating, storing, and shipping seeds to cooperating wheat breeding programs. Being able to do all of these projects under one roof is a huge benefit for the wheat research team. Gutierrez is doing extensive research on wheat, creating a wheat that will be stripe rust resistant. Doing her research in Building 7 has given her opportunities she never thought possible. With endless support from her administration, Gutierrez is making breakthroughs. She can replicate the exact conditions farmers see in the field with technology available in the research unit. Gutierrez has partnered with the Kansas State University research team to collaborate. She sees Building 7 as a shared resource for research. She said, "I want this place to be the best resource for wheat research in the region." The Hard Winter Wheat Genetics Research Unit team has seen amazing results with the wheat that they are growing in the Wheat Genetics Lab. With the technology enabling them to grow wheat year-round in all weather conditions and exposing the crop to diseases, they are continuing to learn more and more about the wheat crop. A big goal for the Hard Winter Wheat Genetics Research Unit is to get the wheat to grow from the young stages to the adult stages with no threats of disease on the crop. Gutierrez said, "In the small amount we have done in field testing, the results are amazing." With the results the Hard Winter Wheat Genetics Research Unit team has been seeing, a wheat line with resistance to stripe rust should be available to farmers in the near future. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. What's ahead on the Kansas agricultural weather front? We'll find out from K-State's Mary Knapp. Next on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Rounding out this Agriculture Today, it's our weekly glance at the Kansas agricultural weather scene with the great help of Mary Knapp, research and extension climatologist here at Kansas State University. Mary, the upside of this week was that there was a fair amount of open weather for producers to get field work done, to some extent anyway.
Right. We started our dry spell at the end of May, and going through the 4th of June, we were below average across the state. Statewide, we averaged 0.35 of an inch, which is just a shade over a third of what you would normally expect. So a very nice dry pattern, not completely shut off, but enough to do some improvement in that surface moisture. The other thing is the temperatures were hovering fairly close to normal, a little cooler than normal in the west and a little warmer than normal in the southeast, but still seasonal in the stretch. So highest temperature 92 in the southeast on the 2nd of June, and the coldest 40 in the southwest on the 30th of May.
You say that, and this again goes back over the week that ended this past Tuesday. Southwest Kansas was the wetter spot of the state. Is that correct?
It was. They averaged 4,700ths of an inch, which was 60% of what they normally would get. A decent amount, but not overwhelming, given the fact that everybody was super wet in May. So welcome moisture in that area.
Now, to point out, in the last couple of days, some rather hefty rainfall has occurred, and that'll show up in next week's roundup. But in south central Kansas, they received rain where they really didn't need it.
Right. As you noted, our cutoff date is on Tuesday, and Wednesday and Thursday we had scattered thunderstorms that didn't move a whole lot, which meant dropping a lot of rain in the areas that were afflicted. Some places saw over 2 inches of rain. And again, in the southeast and south central, where they averaged over 15 inches in May, they don't need that much rain at any one time. On the positive note, we did not get those heavy rains in Nebraska, so our upper river levels are stabilizing rather than continuing to grow. But the situation on the Arkansas River is not improving much.
Well, since you bring that up, you've data fresh from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Kansas City district, which does cover the northern part of the state and the water impoundments, several reservoirs there. And the numbers are starting to improve in as far as the retention levels in those reservoirs.
Right. The ones that we've been focusing a lot on have been on the lower Kansas River, which were at or just barely above full capacity. At those reservoirs, the release rates are exceeding the inflow, so those lake levels are dropping, but not very rapidly. An example, Tuttle was at about 99% of flood capacity last week. They're down to 90% of flood capacity. A little bit better at Perry. They were also at 100% flood capacity. They're down to 83%. So it's improving, but it's improving slowly. The Osage Meredithine is in a similar situation, all of them at 50% or above, and that is flood capacity, not lake levels. So this flooding situation is likely to continue to be an issue through most of the summer.
Lots of water to disperse. That's also true of southern Kansas, as you say. So we'll be monitoring this quite closely as we move along. And the outlook for next week does offer some fieldwork opportunity once more, Mary, but there is also the returning chance for rain off and on.
Right. When we look at it, the Climate Prediction Center quantitative precip forecast for the next week favors the heaviest rain in western Kansas, where they have a little bit more storage capacity left in their soils. That area may see as much as 1.25 inches, and it is widespread across the western third of the state. As you move eastward, the amounts that they are looking for are reduced. They're looking at maybe 0.75 inches in the central part of the state, down to 1/4 inch in the eastern. And again, we don't want to completely shut off the rain, but getting 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch would certainly beat that 5 inches that we've seen on a weekly basis earlier.
Now, in a normal year, we'd be worrying about interference with wheat harvest. But as we heard from Romulo Lollato earlier in the broadcast, the crop is far enough behind that this 2-week forecast may not have much effect there.
Right, and we talked about the precipitation, which is slightly favoring wetter than normal, but the outlook for temperatures are cooler than normal. Looking at Manhattan's outlook for the next week, we're looking at highs in the mid-70s, which isn't going to add a lot of growing degree units. Not probably so much an issue in wheat as in the corn and soybeans. haven't even checked to see how much sorghum has been planted since we've been so delayed getting the corn and soybeans in the ground, and that is still way below what we would normally expect. It will be interesting to see what the numbers show on Monday after this dry pattern that have allowed a lot of people to get some field work done.
And the outlook for the remainder of the summer still for cooler and wetter conditions?
They have not changed that. Hopefully next week we'll get a further update on it, but at this point it still favors wetter than normal across the entire Central Plains for the June, July, and August period, as well as cooler than normal.
We'll catch up with you again next Friday. Mary, many thanks as always, and do enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Eric. You as well.
Mary Knapp, climatologist with K-State Research and Extension, with us right here. As we close out for this week, we'd ask you to check out our podcast service. You'll find this and our previous broadcasts archived there at the website agtoday.net. Also, instructions on how to subscribe to the podcast for automatic downloading on your mobile device, agtoday.net. Meantime, enjoy your weekend as well, won't you? And please be back with us this same time on Monday. Until then, Eric Atkinson, thanking you for joining us for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.